Everyone. My name is Alyssa Perna, and first and foremost, I just wanted to start off by saying that this is an unprecedented time for everyone across the globe, and also especially in our industry. It's an unprecedented time for the event, travel, and tourism industry. And we're going to get through this. I wish everyone all the best. I know it's a tough time. We're all feeling it right now. And we're here tonight to talk about some really important and timely stuff, event crisis communication. And before we get started, if you haven't watched a webinar with me in the past, I just wanted to introduce myself. And as you can see, we have a lovely special guest joining us tonight, my friend and industry colleague, Jody Wolf, and we'll introduce her in just a moment. But to kick it off and introduce myself, I'm Alyssa Perna, and I am first and foremost a tutor for a variety of courses at QC Event School. And I've been working in the event industry for over about 12 years. And my background is focused primarily on corporate and nonprofit events. And I'm also the owner of Experience Events, which is a full-service event planning firm, and we're built to help organizations turn their vision into reality. I'm also the managing director for a wonderful small nonprofit in Cleveland, Ohio called Ingenuity Cleveland. We host year-round programming events and a 15,000-person festival called Ingenuity Fest. So tonight, of course, I am thrilled to have a special guest with us, Jody Wolf, who has a very robust background in corporate events. And I'm going to pass the mic over to Jody to tell you a little bit more about herself. But what's really interesting about Jody is that she has planned events through natural disasters, a terrorist situation, and viruses just like we're experiencing now. So Jody, can you please tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and go ahead.
Sure. Hi, I'm Jody Wolf. First, I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you're all healthy and safe. I've been in the event business for over 20 years. I worked for a large corporation called Signet Jewelers. You might know them better for their brands, jewelry stores of Kay, Zales, Peoples. They have over 3,000 stores. And for 20 years, I planned all their leadership conferences, all their incentive trips, and all of the charitable giving events, all the board meetings and the investor meetings. So everything from very high profile to very large scale, 3,500 people meetings. And during that time, unfortunately, my team and I experienced 9/11. We experienced 3 hurricanes, SARS, and H1N1. And during all those times, it required a team of people to bring everybody together so that we could rally around what was going on in the world and figure out what we were going to do next. It was all about bringing people together. And we've done that successfully over all those events. Now I own my own business, JMW Communication and Events. It's a full service meeting and event planning company. And let me tell you, now's not the time to start your own business. I just recently started it. So I'll turn it back over to Alicia, but that's a little bit about me. Thank you.
Thanks, Jody. We're really glad to have you here and to learn from you through a lot of these intense experiences that have affected the travel and tourism industry, which is our industry, the event industry ultimately. And we, that leads us right into the topic of our webinar tonight, which is all about event crisis communication. So I always like to review the agenda ever so briefly before we dive into the content, just so you know what to expect and what we're going to cover. And so you can start thinking about what kind of questions you want to ask Jody or myself, who are living through the reality of the situation, COVID-19 right now. And on this beautiful webinar platform, you can ask questions and we'll see them. We will address the questions that are asked through the live webinar first, and then we will answer the questions that were pre-submitted by those who are going to tune in and watch this perhaps later at the end of the webinar. So please post your questions throughout the webinar and we'll address them all at the end. So let's review the agenda about crisis communications. First, we're going to start by defining crisis communication. What is it and why it's relevant right now? And we're going to learn from Jody some real life examples that she's lived through and talk about them in depth. And then we'll discuss what's currently happening in the event industry right now. I can tell you from experience what I'm feeling in my business and customers that are going through some, tough times as well, and perhaps hear from Jody in regard to what the state of her business is. And we'll then go into the importance of having really solid contract language that will protect not only your organization, but your event. And then of course, we'll go into Q&A. So let's kick it off. I'm gonna kick it off by asking Jody a question. First, let me actually define before I ask her a question. I want to define what crisis communication is. So there's kind of 3 different levels of crisis communication or stages. So we have the pre-crisis, which is maybe before COVID-19, since this is what we're here really talking about and why it's so timely and relevant. So before COVID-19 was the pre-crisis stage. We're monitoring the risks. We're starting to maybe think about and make some decisions about how to potentially manage what crises could come from this. And then train some people and have those conversations, train the people, our stakeholders and our people who work for us perhaps, who will be involved in managing the crisis process. So then we move into the middle stage, which we're in right now, which is the crisis. Okay, we are starting to feel it here in the United States. I know Italy is in a really dire situation right now with COVID-19, but the crisis is where we're collecting and processing the information as we start to make decisions, and then we're creating and disseminating crisis messages. So you've probably all received those emails from CEOs from all the different organizations that you've signed up for their subscription online lists and hearing messages from them. So we are in the thick of the crisis. Then the third stage will be the post-crisis. And in that stage, we're going to assess the crisis management effort and provide follow-up messages as needed. And then, so I'm going to toss it over to Jody, but we'll talk about, before we move on to the next part, 5 fundamental steps for having an effective crisis communication plan around your events. So Jody, tell us a little bit about crisis communication. Can you walk us through some real life examples that you experienced, maybe by starting with 9/11, which for those of you who live in the United States, we all know about 9/11. It's when the Twin Towers were attacked in New York City, a massive terrorist attack, and Jody lived through that. So Jody, please tell us about that.
Sure. We were having our leadership conference with about 2,000 people down in Orlando. And there were probably about 30 of us down in Orlando. And I got called into the ballroom. The production, the staging, and all the big screens were already in process of being set up. And they tapped into a news feed. And we were watching the replay going on of the first plane hitting the Twin Tower. And then we watched live as the second plane hit the tower. And I looked at my boss and I said, that wasn't an accident. What's going on? And real quickly, we partnered with Disney and found out that our country was under attack. I watched as Magic Kingdom emptied and they closed the parks down. And this is only the second time in history I know that they've closed the Disney parks with the COVID-19 going on right now. And at that time, we put a message out that we were in a hold pattern. We were just like, we don't know what we're doing yet. We're just holding. We had about 200 people either getting ready to get on an airplane or were grounded. All the planes, as you remember, were grounded. And something amazing happened. Our district managers were on their way into the meeting, and wherever they got grounded, they made a chain of driving people back home. So, for example, if a district manager was in flight and his plane got grounded in Charlotte, the Charlotte district manager drove that district manager to North Carolina or to Virginia, and then so on and so forth to the next state until they got actually home to, let's say, Boston. And everybody made it home safely that evening. That was the first and foremost thing, was taking care of the people, making sure they were safe. The next thing that we invoked was we rented 2 buses for mirrors, borrowed blankets and pillows, went to Walmart, got snacks and adult beverages, and we boarded buses and we drove back to Ohio, which is the home base of the company. And from there, we met with our stakeholders, our executives, and we knew that it was important that we had the leadership conference because it was the kickoff to the holiday season. So we then decided that we didn't know when people would be able to fly again. So we decided that we would do regional meetings. Then we would simulcast the general sessions. And from there, what we did was we looked at a map of the United States and where all the stores were. We then found the cities that would work best, where people wouldn't have to be on buses forever. We created 6 regional meetings. We bussed everybody there. The average bus ride was about 5 hours. And like I said, we had simulcast all the general sessions. All the breakouts were done regionally at the meeting. And we pulled all this off with a team of people within an 8-week time period. And it was amazing to watch it all come together. And it was the resilience that nothing can stop you, nothing can take you down, that anything is possible. And people rallied around each other.
That's really an incredible story. Going through that, you had to have learned so much. And as an event planner, you have to really think on your feet and solve problems quickly, while even though maybe inside you don't feel composed, you have to hold your composure, and you're the leader on behalf of what's happening. And it's a really good lesson and story that you just told us about, Jody. Now,
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question for you. When it came to the venue, obviously, you mentioned Disney closed at that time, and you both, it sounds like, mutually agreed that you couldn't host the event. So
Correct.
did a force majeure kick into play? And everybody who's listening, we will talk about what a force majeure is in more depth a little bit later. But can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Right. The force majeure did go into play because people couldn't travel to get there. But we had a partnership with Disney. And that partnership was very key to making that particular hotel one of the 6 regional meetings. So while they didn't get the full 2,000 people, they had about 600 people at their hotel. So yes, they didn't get everything, but we did partner with them and pick them as one of the 6 regional hotels.
Very interesting.
Yes.
So another situation that you lived through, well, many of the same, were quite a few hurricanes. So
Yeah.
can you tell us a story or two about living through a hurricane, a natural disaster, and what happened?
Yes. The last hurricane that we went through, again, was down in Orlando. We were ready to do our leadership conference. We were already down there along with our district managers. Seems to be a pattern of the same story here. And we knew the hurricane was coming into Florida. And we decided that we couldn't have the meeting. We couldn't back up the meeting another week because there was another group coming in right behind us. There was no alternative dates to move the meeting to with the hotel. So at that time, we were kind of in a hold pattern. But the first thing we did was we got our district managers out of Orlando. And by that time, all the flights were full. So again, we rented buses and we bused them to Atlanta. And from Atlanta, they flew home. We stayed an extra day and a half. And once the Orlando airport closed and they started canceling flights into Orlando, inbound and outbound, that triggered the force majeure. And once that force majeure went into place, within 8 hours, we were already shopping for another hotel. Within 8 hours, we had a new contract in place. And within about 3 days, we communicated to the stores what the new date was and the location. And then we worked all the flights and got everybody to the new location in a 3-week period.
Wow, another incredible story. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now, the other piece of it, which is pretty relevant to what we're all experiencing right now, is you also lived through some viruses, not as severe and intense as COVID-19, but you lived through H1N1 and SARS. Did those viruses at all affect your meetings?
Yes, it was our incentive trips. It was the H1N1 that was really prevalent. And so what we did was the trips were originally scheduled for April, and we immediately canceled the trips out of the safety and security of the employees. And what we did was we partnered with the hotel. We found out what other dates were available. There were open dates at mid and the end of June. So we did 2 back-to-back trips, for lack of a better word. And during that time, we didn't promise that we were still gonna go to the people. We just said, these are tentative dates we're looking at. We're following what's the advice of the CDC as well as WHO. And based on that, if everything's cleared, we'll go on the trip. So it was kind of a 30-day, 45-day period where we thought we were going to go, but we weren't quite sure yet. So we implemented Plan B with some contingencies around it, but it did work out and we were able to pull off the 2 trips.
Wow. Wow. So you've been through a lot when it comes to natural disasters, illnesses, things like that. So with all those experiences under your belt, what were the biggest lessons you've learned, or do you have any tips or advice to share with us going through that?
Emotionally, it's hard because you're going through whatever's going on in the world. You're being affected too, as well as your friends and your family. First and foremost, stay calm. Partner with your stakeholders. Understand what they want to do. You know, look at other options. Build a contingency plan or plan B. Okay? Just keep that in your back pocket because it's so important because that's how our industry survives. So if you have an upcoming event, think outside the box and start creating your contingency plan because we don't have the answers right now of what's going on with COVID-19. It changes day to day, hour to hour. Things are just rolling right now, and we're all in a hold pattern. So start thinking outside the box and get creative with contingency planning and understand and talk to your stakeholders.
Excellent. That's really, really helpful. Awesome. I think we're going to move to the next phase at this point of the webinar, where we're going to address the state of the industry right now to the best of our ability, the state of the event industry. And I'll walk you through at least some of the things that I'm personally experiencing with either clients or business partners, things like that, and what we're doing to evaluate and make decisions at this time. So what I see happening is a lot of talks about either flat out canceling and what that could look like, or potentially rescheduling more immediate events within the next couple months. Again, as Jody mentioned, we don't know what's going to happen with COVID-19. It changes literally daily by the hour. And that's what most people I've been talking to in the industry are also experiencing. It's hard for them to put their finger on what it's going to look like in a month, not to mention tomorrow. So we're all making our way through this. What I can tell you is the more immediate events, the things that are happening maybe literally tomorrow or we're scheduled for tomorrow, those have been canceled. At least in Ohio, we are on a, I guess unofficial, but we're on lockdown at this point. We shouldn't be leaving the house other than for medical reasons or for essential items like medication or getting groceries so we can feed ourselves. Otherwise, we really can't be leaving our yards, and we have the social distancing thing, which a lot of people are experiencing right now. So with that said, the force majeure, which we will define in a little bit, goes into play for the events, which means if I had an event at a hotel, that basically means the hotel isn't going to come after my event for money, and vice versa. I'm not going to go after the hotel and say, hey, you didn't hold up your end of the contract, so you're responsible to pay me this amount of money. We're both mutually kind of excusing each other right now because this is an act of God, essentially, and almost it's not a natural disaster, but it's a disaster. So that's why this force majeure thing comes into play. And so, lots of talk about immediate stuff's definitely being canceled or rescheduled or to be evaluated later. Things down the line, we're just watching it day to day, week to week as well. We'll make the decisions when we need to. And the most important thing right now is to have that open, transparent, and honest communication with your stakeholders. So if you are thinking about maybe rescheduling or something, when the venue has the time to chat with you, just being open and honest, like, here's what we're all facing together. What would it look like if I wanted to reschedule my event? The best thing you can do is have the conversation so you both can work together to come up with a solution that will be mutually beneficial for both parties at the end of the day. So that's what I'm seeing in the industry. Of course, our industry is getting hit right now with perhaps furloughs. So maybe we're losing our job for hopefully a short period of time and then getting it back. Luckily, the government in the United States has put some protections in place to extend health insurance and things like that, which is certainly helpful and appreciated. But hopefully this is temporary, and the industry is going to come back, and we will talk about that too. So Jody, I'm going to ask you, what do you see happening in the industry?
Well, I think, through the experiences I've been through and what I'm going through right now with my current programs is that people are partnering together. Everybody's going through the same thing at the same time. And, when bad things happen, it always brings out the best in people. And I think we're all going through that right now. I have an event scheduled for September. It's still on the books, ready to go. However, the client is busy dealing with the events taking place right now within their own organization and company and dealing with those. Get it? We're not talking about it now. I had an event scheduled or a temporary, we were looking at doing an event at a hospital. That is totally off right now and understandable. We're not even going to approach that. So whatever events you have coming up, you have to always think about the people first. How are the people going to react? Are they going to be safe, and are they going to be secure? And if you can't actually do a live event, there's so many options available with technology today that you could work with a production company, depending on the scale of the meeting. So if anybody needs help in that area, I I'm partnering with a production company as well. There's ways around it that you can still be effective to get those immediate needs done now, so that when this pandemic dies down, we can move forward. So, there are technologies in place right now to keep rolling.
Definitely, definitely. And I love what you said about coming together. It's so important. Right now, we're all going through it. And I think at least everyone I've ever spoken to is very understanding regarding what we're all going through. So just, being patient with each other, kind, and putting people first is really important right now. And all this said, looking towards the future, the question becomes, what can we do to protect our events? And right now, I think is a good time to talk about the importance of having clear and concise contract language. And there's a couple of key definitions that Jody and I wanted to talk about. So we've mentioned this force majeure quite a many times already. So I wanted to define what force majeure is for you, and then talk a little bit more about it, and how I've seen it used, and Jody's seen it used in different events. So a force majeure is basically an unforeseeable circumstance that prevents someone from fulfilling a contract. A force majeure refers to a clause that is included in contracts to remove liability for natural and unavoidable catastrophes that interrupt the expected course of events and restrict participants from fulfilling their obligations. So to put it quite frankly for everyone here, if you have a great thing to do in your contracts, if you haven't done this now, you certainly will in the future, have a mutual force majeure in your contract. So what that means is if a pandemic like COVID-19 comes around again, that you really can't sue the venue or your partners, and the venues can't sue you, or your partners can't sue you. You're both going through an unavoidable catastrophe, and you kind of mutually just excuse each other. Okay, so that's at the end of the day what it means from a legal perspective. Jody, do you have any additional insight or light to shed when it comes to force majeure?
Yeah, the force majeure is when both parties invoke that they cannot have the event. Everybody dismisses each other from any liability. The other thing with contracts right now that I'd like to just touch on briefly is if you have an upcoming event, there's usually payments that are due. So, at different periods throughout the contract leading up to your event is what I'm trying to say. So if you have a payment that's coming due, and let's say your meeting is in June, reach out to your supplier right now, because we're in a time period when we don't know when this COVID's going to end. And I think that's where you have the open, honest discussion with the supplier about what, I'm more than happy to pay you now. However, if we can't pull off this event, just have those open discussions with your suppliers right now, because you don't want to be on the short end of the stick. So that's some of my advice. Look at your contract and the details of your contract. That's very, very important right now.
Definitely, Jody. And to that note, when it comes to the contracts as well, just remember that whatever you decide to do, I'm really talking mostly about a venue agreement, because those tend to be the most costly thing with events, because you're probably paying for catering and maybe a room block and perhaps room rental fees, things like that. So I'm using that as an example right now. While you probably have in your contract some kind of cancellation chart where you're responsible to pay the fees, the earlier you can have the conversations with your partners or vendors or venues, the better it will go for the both of you. I've seen it happen in my experience over the years negotiating venue agreements. If we've had a change or we're really struggling with our event to get the attendance numbers we had originally thought we were going to get, if you have the conversation as early as possible, the venues tend to be more apt to work with you on those costs. If you have the ability, for thinking about canceling, perhaps, if you can offer to rebook something at that venue in the future, I've seen venues take a portion of what you owe, a cancellation fee, and apply it as a deposit for the next year's event. Sometimes 100% of the money. I don't know. It all depends. It could be a limited amount. It could be more. So just have those conversations. That's the best thing you can do. You have something to add, Jody?
The only other thing I would say is understand what their calendar is. If you need to postpone the event and you're able to postpone the event, what is the availability on their calendar? And maybe you had certain parts or space at the hotel that you needed or that you wanted it to look this way. Maybe they don't have all the space you need. That's where you get creative and you think outside the box about how you can change your schedule around, how you can change the pattern to make it work. Because you want everybody to win in this situation. You want the industry to win, you want your attendees to win, and you want to win. So,
absolutely. And before we kind of wrap up force majeure and really important contract language, I did want to touch on cancellation and rebook clauses. So oftentimes, if you are, as Jody mentioned, there's probably some kind of chart that shows in your contracts that you owe X amount of money by this day, then you owe X amount of money by this day, which you obviously should fulfill the contract and pay those deposits and things that are due ahead of the event. But just look at your language, because, and if you don't have this language that I'm about to talk about, definitely incorporate it in the future moving forward for every event. There are often cancellation clauses that outline if you cancel your event, this is how much you will owe. That can be negotiated with venues. There are also things called rebook clauses. So what that means is you can sometimes, the hotel industry has gotten more strict with this over the years, I do have to say, but you can sometimes get a hotel or a venue to agree that if you cancel an event and you promise to rebook an event of equal size at least, that perhaps a certain percentage of what you owe them in a cancellation fee will go towards next year's event. And that is called a rebook clause. So you're basically promising you're going to rebook an event. You're guaranteeing that this is money that they will have at some point in the future. There tends to be more flexibility with the venue when you have a rebook clause. And rebook clauses could be up to, in best case scenario, 100% of the cancellation fees. It could be 50%. It could be less. So that all depends on what you have negotiated or your sourcing provider has negotiated on your behalf before signing the contract.
correct.
So I think the key here is communication with the venue and your vendors and your stakeholders is key, right?
Yes.
Cool. Anything else to add with that or contract language, Jody? Because we're getting pretty close to opening it up for questions.
I think if you get stuck and you don't know what to do, it's okay to ask for advice, whether it's somebody in legal or somebody that you work with that does contracting all the time. They'll be able to guide you through the process. So don't be afraid to ask those questions. You want to understand it. You want to learn.
Definitely. That's a great point. Before we go into Q&A, I wanted to circle back. I mentioned before 5 fundamentals, and in fact, it's actually 6 fundamental steps for effective crisis communication plans around your event. So I want to just kind of wrap up what we just talked about by going through those 6 pieces, and then we'll open it up, of course, for questions. So anyone who is tuning in live right now, feel free to comment or ask your question, and Jody and I will start with those first, and then we'll move into some of the pre-submitted questions that students sent over the last couple of days to wrap this up. So the 5 fundamental steps for an effective crisis communication plan for events would be: number 1, you need to define your key audience. So for example, it could be event attendees. You could have an audience of sponsors. You could have your speaker audience, your venue audience, your vendor audience. So defining your audiences, then determining who is going to be the key internal point of contact for those audiences when you're communicating with them. Then it's really important to clearly have identified the communication platforms you'll be using. So are you going to communicate via email? And are you creating separate messaging for each of these stakeholders? Probably, because what you're saying to sponsors is probably a little different than what you're going to say to the venue, right? So identifying how you're going to communicate with each of these audiences, whether it's email, website, social media, etc. And then most importantly, putting together a communication plan. What is your key messaging? How are you planning on moving forward right now? And then putting that key point of contact in touch with these various audiences. And then lastly is managing media, managing the, perhaps you have a local newscaster that's coming to find out more about why you canceled this event or what your experience is. Who is your key point of contact that is working with the media and sort of answering the questions to the best of the ability, and not saying the wrong thing, because it's a really sensitive time right now for everyone. So those are the kind of the 6 key things to think about with crisis communication. I hope that helps. So let's go into questions. So I know these questions might be a little challenging, tough right now. So Jody and I are both going to do our very best to answer the questions. And real quick, QC, I know there was a pre-submitted question that I do not see down here anymore. So if you can comment what that question was, I'd love to address it. But I do see that Amber asked a question. Amber asked, and I'll ask the question, Jody, maybe take a stab at answering it first, and I'll chime in if I have anything to share as well. So Amber asked, what do we anticipate will be the best ways that they can offer services as an event planner after the crisis dies down? So what kind of services would be of value once this crisis dies down, do you think?
I think contracting is probably going to be really paramount going forward here. I have a feeling in my gut that contracting may change. Just a gut feeling that there might be different levels in the force majeure, like an A, B, and C, because what has happened now is, essentially shut down the industry. So I think contracting is really important. And I think that networking as a team right now with each other is really important. I can't stress that enough. Take this time to network with as many planners and people, suppliers you can meet, because those relationships and those networks will all come together as soon as we get through this crisis.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with what Jody said. Contracting is going to become spotlighted for sure after this. And I think both venues and partners and us planners and people who do handle contracting will probably adjust what language we're using to better protect both parties at the end of the day. So totally agree with that. So let's go on to the next question. Rosemary asked, can we get a sample of a new contract outlining all of these new points? So I think I'll start off with that. We can probably provide some kind of key bullet points about what language that you want to have protect, or what things you'd want to have protected in a contract. But oftentimes this kind of contract language is like copywritten to property rights are owned by whoever is sourcing these meetings and events. So I don't know that we'll be able to share actual written language that will go directly into a contract, but we can certainly provide perhaps some guidance around what you should include and how you can cover yourself. And I think the best thing that you can do is, let's say you're contracting with a venue or you're contracting with a hotel. You aren't going to be the first person who's asked them for a mutual force majeure or a cancellation and rebook clause. So have the conversation with them and say, I really need to protect my event, especially given this pandemic situation we just experienced. So can we have a mutual force majeure added to the contract? Can we have this added to the contract? And they might already have that language stipulated and written out. They can simply add to your agreement. Anything to add there, Jody?
No, I think you covered it very well. I mean, I think that, like you said, a lot of it is based on the organization, and it is their own language. So you can actually find a lot of the language on the web. So I think that, it depends. You want as much language in there as possible. Don't pick the generic force majeure. Cover everything, because you just never know what will happen.
Exactly. Dawn just asked us, how long have either of us canceled events out thus far? So have you experienced any event cancellations in your career, and how did you handle that? And if you don't, I could take a stab.
No, I have never had an event canceled. They were always postponed to later in the year. So they were always just pushed back. I've never had an event canceled. So no, I'm sorry, I don't have any
That's okay.
information.
I could take a stab. I actually have lived through I'll give you a cancellation example, and then I've lived through a few situations where we just weren't going to make it in terms of our room block, which is basically, for those of you who don't know, if you're booking an event at a hotel and you're blocking a bunch of rooms that are specific just to your group, and you couldn't quite make it. I've lived through those experiences, or really not having the attendance we wanted, and how to work around that. So in a cancellation situation, the first thing the venue is going to do is they're going to revert back to your contract. What does the contract say? How much do you owe? Now, this is unfortunately a game. It's not a game. That's not the right word, but you have to work with the venue. So either you can flat out accept cancellation fees and pay them, which rightfully, according to the contract, you owe that money, right? But if you know sooner than later that you need to cancel an event, the sooner you can have the conversation, the better the outcome for you. If you have an event you could rebook in the future of equal size, or even if it's not equal, if you can book something there, have the conversation with the venue. They will react more favorably to you in that situation.
Yeah.
Now you can plead, you can kind of run it up the chain and do your best to just explain the situation and see if the venue will do anything to help you out. It is really not their responsibility to help you out. If they're doing that, they're being nice, in good partnership. But what you've signed is a contract and a contractual agreement. Therefore, at the end of the day, if they're not willing to work with you, you are still responsible to pay the fees as outlined in your contract. So that is just the truth of the matter.
Right.
Jody,
And
go ahead.
I can add one thing to that. I have fallen short of my room block in the past, just for whatever reason. And in those cases, rather than paying the hotel just the cancellation or their cancellation fees for the rooms, I've reinvested those dollars into F&B or to something else that benefited the attendees. So it's just
Absolutely.
another way of looking at it. Rather, no, you just don't want to write a check for penalties. So always think of reinvesting it somehow into the program if you do get
Yes.
stuck with it.
Yes, absolutely. And it all comes down to the partnership with the venue. Some venues have been incredibly kind over and over and over in my experience. And on the other hand, some, quite frankly, they've got enough business going. You're maybe a small fish in a big pond, and they aren't really going to work with you. So it really depends on who you're working with and the partnership. It comes back to having a really good relationship and with the venue and having those transparent conversations. So tricky. These are all tricky questions. And I think Jody and I are both just answering based off of our personal experiences. So let's go on to some of the pre-submitted questions, and I'll still toggle back to the live webinar and see if anybody comes up with another question. But diving into the pre-submitted questions, Daniela asked us, as soon as it goes back to normal, what kind of changes or adjustments should an event decor company do to prevent more issues in the future? Jody, you want to take that one?
Sure, I'll try. I think that, with event decor, you might have already ordered the props, the product, and now you have them, unless they were in your warehouse. So, you're kind of out of this money. Again, it goes back to the relationship with the client and getting creative of how you could use that and how you can still partner with them in the future. I've had worked with decor companies that weren't necessarily within the town I was having the event, but I trust the person and I have the relationship with them. And they actually partnered with another decor company, and they still fulfilled what we needed and more. So again, it's getting creative and thinking outside the box. So that's why it's so important to network with others, because you don't know what someone else may need.
Absolutely. I don't have much to add there, other than it all comes back to the importance of contracted language. Okay, so you may consider looking back at what's written in your contracts to further protect yourself. But just like we've been talking about throughout this whole webinar, is partnership. So even if your contract says something like this person is still liable to pay for their decor, period, just try to offer them, extend an olive branch and try to work with them to help them out at their future event. We all have to try to work together right now, and just be kind to one another at this point. So another question we have here from Jill. Jill asked us to clarify what force majeure covers exactly. And we defined what force majeure was already, so I think we kind of tackled that. But her question furthers a little bit more and asks, for example, if a venue contract states refunds are at the venue's discretion, would force majeure still apply? Any contracting tips or advice for how to handle refunds would be helpful. Jody, what do you think about that? You've lived through a few force majeures.
Yeah, I've never had a problem with a refund. It took about 30 to 45 days to get the refund, but they all came through. It was because once the force majeure goes into place, then you just partner with a supplier to actually process the refund. It was never an issue or a problem collecting the dollars. Now, if it's cash flow problem where you're looking to rebook someplace else or change venues, then you may have a little bit of a glitch there as far as cash flow. But all in all, again, it goes back to the relationship with a supplier and your partners. But I always got the money back. It was never an issue. Never.
Awesome. Jody, you also shared with me in a private conversation with each other a few weeks back some really interesting stuff that shed light for me on when a force majeure becomes, enacted, right, is the word. Can you tell us when, in your experience, that a force majeure has been a go and no questions asked, agreeable, versus when it's questionable?
Right. The example I'll go back to is the hurricane. So when the Orlando airport was shut down, that prevented the ability for people to fly into the destination. So there was not a method for people to get there. So that is when we invoked the force majeure, because there just wasn't a method for people to get to the meeting. So you couldn't have somebody from California be expected to drive to the meeting. So that's when it went into play. So it's a mutual agreement. The force majeure goes into play when circumstances prevent people from attending, whether it's a natural disaster, an act of God, a pandemic. Those are the general ones that usually fall under a force majeure.
Yeah, that's incredibly helpful. Thank you. So Chanel asked another really good and tough question. She asked, as an event planner starting out, do you think we're going to have an industry to even market to? And how long will it take to bounce back? Is this a good time to create a business? Yes, great question. Tough one. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I think
what are your thoughts?
yeah, right now it's a little tough. I'm just being transparent and honest. It's rough right now. I think it will bounce back? Absolutely. If things go as planned, and that we get through this pandemic within the next 30 days, I do believe that industry will come back, and I think will come back strong. So I just, I don't have a crystal ball to tell anybody what's going to happen, but I hope and pray that we get back on track here real quickly, and things go as planned. But again,
Absolutely.
have plan B in your back pocket.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, the industry is huge. The event industry, the travel and tourism industry. I don't see it going anywhere. I think it will slowly come back and trickle back. I think that naturally, consumers and everyday people will probably have a little bit of fear of traveling after we've maybe recovered from this pandemic, but things will come back to normal. The event industry is huge. It was growing significantly before this came into play. So I think the best thing maybe you can do right now is keep training, doing things to improve on your skill set as an event planner. There's tons of old webinars from QC Event School that are still timely and relevant that you can watch and learn from. There are publications like Meetings Today that have free webinars you can find on their websites that actually help you gain credits, continuing education credits, things like that. So take this as an opportunity, as Jody said, to network, but also to learn. That way you are really ready to rock and roll when the industry comes swinging back. So that's what I would recommend there. So Keisha asked, any financial advice for event planners during a crisis? That's a tough one. Everybody's different and has their own personal situations to deal with and adjust to. If you don't have a savings or something like that, and you do have an event business, I know there are some loans right now that the government is offering. However, just bear in mind it's a loan. It will have interest attached to it. You'll have to pay it back. So go into that. Make sure you do your research and have a lot of knowledge and really evaluate, do you need this? Is it worth it? Look into unemployment. Could you be covered under the act, at least in the United States, that I think was passed? So those are kind of the things you can do now. But in the future, I always would recommend, this is totally not event planning at all, but to save some money. I know it's hard to do. Put some money in your bank account that you don't touch. Because if something like this were to happen again, you'll feel a lot more comfortable going into it and riding the wave, riding it out, unfortunately. So Jody, what do you think?
I would agree with that 100%. We're riding the wave right now. And if you can, if you do have that savings, then congratulations, good for you. I know that there are a lot of there might be some temporary positions out there in various industries that need help right now. That might be a solution just as a holdover right now until we get through this time period. So it's not a reflection that you're leaving your career. It's just a temporary state right now.
Yeah, definitely. And then kind of piggybacking off of that, Cheryl asked us, how can I plan to best be prepared when the economy bounces back? What do you think, Jody?
I think I mean, all of you on this webinar right now, you can all see each other's names. I would recommend that you create your own network. Um, you'd be amazed about how much you can learn from each other. Take this opportunity to absorb and learn and make new partnerships with as many people as you can. Because if one planner's doing this over here, maybe they have something, for example, in August that they need help on, and you have something in September that you need help on. Guess what? You've just made, you're both working in both months. Take this time to reach out to as many people as you can to make those partnerships, because that's what keeps the event world moving.
For sure. Yes, absolutely right. It's a very, we live in a medium-sized city here in Cleveland/Akron, Ohio, but it's a very close industry, and everybody kind of knows everybody, or at least knows of everybody in the event industry. So those relationships are really important. And beyond taking coursework or taking the time where there's not much going on until this virus passes, to learn is important. But another piece of advice I could give is, obviously maybe now is not the best time to launch and promote an event business, but what you could do is maybe establish the business in your state. So going through the paperwork of creating an LLC, creating a website, learning a little bit of web design skills, writing the copy for your website, creating your social media pages. These are all things you can do, so you don't have to worry about doing them later when the event industry does come booming back. This is an opportunity to set yourself up to be really successful and prepared for when the event industry does really start coming back. So another thing I wanted to mention is that QC Event School did start actually a student group. So if you are currently enrolled with QC Event School, or if you have already graduated, there's a really new awesome student group that is available now. So if perhaps Maggie from QC could comment in the feed here what that group is called, please join it. I moderate the group, and I will have some office hours or digital office hours where I can answer questions for you guys and shed some light, or at least find the answers if I don't have them for you. So that's really important. So join that group if you're a student, and we'll all stay in touch and just share with each other what the heck's going on, right? As things change. So another question was, Iwa asked how to deal with a wedding during COVID-19. I'll tell you before I kick it over to Jody. I have a friend, actually. He's usually my trusted and loyal audiovisual tech for my events. He was scheduled to get married in like 2 weeks, and they had to make a really tough decision and worked closely with their venue and their partner vendors to reschedule their wedding. So they made the decision to reschedule, and it was all about communication. I always say communication is key, and having those open conversations about what are our options right now, and making the best decision for the bride and groom from a personal perspective, and their families. They probably can't travel right now. Is the most important. Jody, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I heard on recently that there was a couple, they were scheduled to get married here soon, and they decided still to get married, but they're having their big reception later this year. So it was important for them to get married, but they're holding off on the big reception and the big party with all the family and friends, because nobody wants to infect another person. So, it was the right thing to do. So, I'm sure that's probably very disappointing for a lot of people right now.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough for
It is.
everyone, for sure. And I really feel for for couples who have to deal with this right now. It's a lot to go through emotionally. So another question here from Prudence. She asked, I'm a new graduate and I'm a little overwhelmed with coronavirus. Would you suggest working for someone else now, or should I continue to set up and start my own business? I think that's probably a personal choice. You could probably do a little bit of both. Do a little contract work. Put yourself out there on social media and say, hey, I'm here, I'm available. Here's my skill set, or here's my qualifications. If anyone needs help, whether it's now or when we start hosting events again. You should also take it as an opportunity, if you have the time, to start working on your own business on the back end. That takes a lot of time to get it right. So I think a little bit of both is my answer. What do you think, Jody?
I would agree 100%. It all takes time. So do what you need to do right now. One thing I've learned is networking with people. I keep going back to that, but it's just so important. That's where 85% of everything happens, is within networking. So
yeah, for sure. Got another question here from Christina. I think us planners have all been through this before. So how do you diffuse a situation with a client who's in hysterics? Have you experienced that, Jody?
yes, I have. You actually have to become the calming voice. You have to understand their concerns. You have to prioritize what their needs are, and then you just move forward from there. A lot of times they might have something going on personally that is making them even more hysterical than uh, just with what's going on. So, it's really understanding what their needs are, and then you can work from there. You have to be the calming voice at this time. And a calming voice is what is needed right now more than anything.
For sure. Comfort, reassurance,
Right.
listening. They might just need somebody to listen to right now and let them vent. I know
Yes.
that it's a professional relationship, but this is taking a big emotional toll on people, understandably so. So just being that point of comfort, listening to them, reassuring them, but while also being honest and transparent with them. You don't want to promise that, you know what, it's all going to be okay in a week. Don't worry about it. I promise we'll do this, blah, blah, blah. That's the worst thing you can do. Comfort them and be that source of calm, but also be honest with them about the situation. You have to tackle that head on. It's really important to be transparent. So, Carlene asked, she said, we're doing the classes online and have access to tutors there. But it's difficult to get in touch with someone outside of the tutors who maybe are grading your assignments at QC. How can this be more effective? Great question. And I go back to saying we started a student group. So please join that student Facebook group, and that's going to be a better way for us to actually be in touch with each other on the regular. My top number one choice for social media is Facebook, if that shows my generation or my age. So I will be around a lot, and I'm happy to point you in the right direction, get you in touch with the right people to get questions answered through that group. And we can all rely on each other as well to answer questions and talk about the experiences we're dealing with together through that group. Jenny Jones asked, how do I negotiate with vendors as a new planner to make room in the budget for clients? So I'm wondering, I think maybe what Jenny's asking here is how can she make sure that she's budgeting for her events correctly? So what I would say, and my advice time and time again, is before you sign a contract, to always collect all the estimates up front. So whoever you're going to partner with for AV, or if it's multiple people you're considering, get that full-blown estimate up front. Negotiate everything you can up front before you sign a contract. Because once you sign a contract, you are locked into the rack rate pricing or the published pricing. And I know it's a lot of work to get all that stuff ahead of time, but it's the best way to operate and the best way to get the most bang for your buck. So that's my advice. What do you think, Jody?
Yeah, I would think so. I always like to comparison shop too. That's my, before I book any event, I'm always doing I love RFPs or a request for a proposal, and shop around, make sure you're getting a competitive price, make sure it's fair, and watch out for miscellaneous and service charges, just because those add up very quickly. So, and a lot of those can be negotiated so that you don't have to pay them. And avoid, I'm a net girl. I don't want any commission. I want just flat pricing. Give me the best price you can give me. So that's my advice.
Fantastic. So Vivian asked us how to deal with events coming up in August. That's a tough one, Vivian.
It is.
Yeah, I
It is.
think you have a few options or multiple options to consider for an event that I have coming up in the fall. We're right now talking about our options. We're looking at the cancellation and perhaps rebooking an event, where we fall in the tier of owing money, and kind of trying to make our decision around a timeline in the back of our heads. But we also don't know what's going to happen with COVID-19. As looking at it with a pessimist's eyes, looking back at the flu of 1918, that went away for the summer, and then it came back even worse in the fall. So we really don't know what's going to happen. Now we have a lot better medical technology and professionals these days versus 1918, but it's something to think about. So I think you have to evaluate your options now. When it's appropriate and timely, have a conversation with your venue or your event partners about, if you maybe rebooked the event or canceled it, what would that look like? Would you owe the full amount in the contract? Would force majeure come into play? Have the conversation and know what your options are. And just know it still could change. Until we have a vaccine, things could still change. It's tough. What do you think, Jody?
I agree, and come up with that plan B that we've been talking about, that contingency plan. So if you can't do the event live, is there a method that you could do it virtually and still make it very interactive and engaging? So again, it's getting creative and thinking differently. So it's just think outside the box and come up with plan B in the event that you can't push it back, or you can't have it in August. Look at all your options, and it all comes back to communication and talking to all your suppliers and all your partners to figure out what's the best option.
Definitely. Tony asked us, what's the best way to promote a postponed event after COVID-19? You want to take that one, Jody, first?
Sure. I would create social media pages that you could make them private and create that excitement and build up of the event is coming. Use teasers, which can be just a teaser, or it could be interactive. You could use polling, tag boards. There's so much out there right now you could use to make it beneficial for the attendees, so that you keep that excitement about the event, so that they don't forget about it. And I think right now in society, everybody's looking forward to doing something and, getting out again and being able to go to restaurants and travel and see their family and have fun again. So it's about creating that excitement. So that's what I would do.
Awesome advice there. And just like Jody said, I agree with everything she said. And as long as you have a very clear communication plan, you might even cycle back and redo the marketing plan you had and kind of repeat the wheel with the same stuff you already did to promote the initial event. But also, with the new date announcement in mind is probably a good place to start. Now, Roxanne asked us, Jody, this is probably a more basic question about starting out her career of owning her own event planning business. But Roxanne asked us, how can I get clientele? That is a good question, Roxanne.
Yeah.
Any advice to give there, Jody?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the same answer I've been going to all night. It's really networking. It's not what you know, it's who you know. So it's putting your name out and spreading your name with everybody that you know. It could be family members, it could be people you used to work with, it could be your fellow event planners, it could be suppliers you've worked with. Let everybody know what you're doing. And once you do that, word spreads and your reputation's known, and it just kind of happens. And that's my advice: is networking is the key to everything.
Absolutely, Jody. And beyond that, make sure you have like yourself represented well. You know, if you have your own business, make sure you have a website, some social media pages that you're communicating with your audience. That maybe you invest in a bit of a Facebook advertising campaign or something like that to get the word out that you're open for business and available for hire. So those are some extra things you can consider doing as well. Nakia asked us, what do we say to a potential client that may have slipped through the cracks due to COVID-19? So maybe they fell off the face of the earth and we haven't heard from them. What do you think, Jody?
Well, I know that a lot of companies out there right now are dealing with the pandemic and their own internal running the organization. I wouldn't think of it as maybe they slipped through the cracks. I would think of it more as they've got higher priorities right now as running the business and the organization. I know many companies right now have employees working virtually, and that's a different environment for those that don't have that right now. And I know that there's a lot of Zoom conference calls and things going on to keep everybody up to date as to how their company's progressing and where they're going. So I wouldn't be offended by it right now. I would just maybe follow up with them in a couple weeks as we work through this COVID, and it's when the curve starts to flatten out, maybe reach out to them at that point and it'll be a little calmer. They just might be in their own mini crisis right now, just working in a new way within their corporation.
Absolutely. 100%, Jody. So the last pre-submitted question we have is from Andrea, who asks, since COVID-19 has caused a lot of events to be canceled, how much of an impact is that making on the events industry? And what type of events are considered being held over others? So it's making a huge impact on the event industry. As we mentioned throughout the whole webinar here, lots of cancellations, lots of rescheduling, shuffling things around. Maybe people are doing virtual events. We're all adjusting and trying to figure out how to make this the new normal, at least for now. So it's absolutely affected our industry. And events that are being held over others, at least from the United States perspective, if a state has issued no gatherings, for a certain amount of people, or stay in your home and don't leave, then we need to abide by those recommendations and those rules, right? So we can all be healthy and get back to normal as quick as possible. So I think only the necessary events are being held, such as press conferences that we're seeing online and on the TV and on NPR right now. Those are the essential type of events that need to happen. Aside from that, at least what I'm seeing is everything else is canceled. What about you, Jody? Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I am seeing the exact same thing. I'm seeing that everything is canceled and either being pushed back or looked at alternative options, whether virtual later in the year. But everything that I'm seeing right now is come to a complete halt. And I do believe our industry is like you said, Alyssa, is way too big to fall down. And so it will come back and it will come back and we'll all get there. It's just a matter of when and the timing. But we'll make it. We always do.
We always do, for sure.
We always do.
Now I'm gonna circle back to some of the live questions. People, if you're still here, have asked in the last 20 minutes as we've been answering these other questions. So Christy asked, she works for a nonprofit that runs a large outdoor community event or multiple events. Do we have suggestions for online platforms or resources that could be used to host community events online? There's lots out there. Like Jody mentioned, Zoom, they're offering like a free, I guess, membership right now where you can basically, it won't cut you off after talking for 40 minutes. So it won't end your meeting. So that's something, a good solution for maybe a smaller group to meet. You know, what do you think? Do you know of any virtual platforms that could be helpful for virtual meetings? Or you mentioned the AV partner that you're working with, Jody. You want to talk about that a little bit?
That's more for a very large scale meeting or an event. So if it's a very large scale event, you do want to make it interactive. You just don't want talking heads all the time. That people will just be like zoned out. So you have to incorporate video, you have to incorporate some speaker support, you have to incorporate some games and some just different questions that people can ask, people can talk. You just have to make it very interactive. So whatever you were planning before, you have to think differently, and you just have to get creative on how you can bring your key messaging from what you were trying to accomplish to life in a virtual way. So it's not going to feel the same as a live event, but you can still accomplish it and have fun. And I just, if you need help on that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, because we've done it before and it actually has turned out very well and people had a good time. So.
Awesome. So that was it for all the questions that were submitted. So I'm going to end it with something that Christina B commented in the feed here. And she had mentioned that her calming voice includes chocolate. And I just wanted to show you guys before I jumped on here. My calming voice is my chocolate chips before the live webinar. She is a volunteer for a nonprofit that was kind of left with, it sounds like, a mess. And they're trying to figure it all out. So eat your chocolate to stay sane, because I do the same thing. And last call for questions. I know we've been going on for a while, and thank you for the kind words and compliments. We really wanted this to be helpful and informative. Jody and I certainly don't have all the answers, but we have some insight. So Jody, do you have any last minute things you want to add before we wrap up this webinar?
I just want everybody to stay healthy. I want everybody to stay safe. And please know that we will all be okay and we will all get through this together. And if anybody needs any help or wants any advice, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm more than willing to help you in any way. So together we'll get through this.
Thank you, Jody. And thank you so much for joining us for the webinar. Your insights and experiences are invaluable and incredibly helpful as we figure this all out together. Thanks to everybody who tuned in, and same thing goes if you guys need some advice or anything, never hesitate to reach out as well. I've probably mentioned I'm on Facebook a lot, so you can reach me there easily, and we will get through this. We will prevail, we'll get back into it. And I do have a feeling that once everybody is done with COVID-19 and we're all kind of in the clear, that there will be maybe even an opportunity for us to be very busy, because everybody will be itching to get out and do something fun. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. Hang in there. We're going to get through it together. And thanks so much. Have a great night and good luck to everybody. Stay healthy.